In the spring of 1871, the body of a man named Jones was discovered in Drum Creek, not far from present-day Cherryvale, Kansas. The dead man's throat had been cut from ear to ear and his skull caved in. Not long after that, 2 more bodies were discovered, both having the same injuries as Jones, their skulls brutally bashed and throats slit. By 1873, reports of missing people who had passed through the area had become so common that travelers began to avoid the trail altogether. All told, at least 20 people would disappear on this eerie section of the Great Osage Trail. Was it wild Indians? Maybe roving bands of outlaws? Or was it straight out of a Rob Zombie movie-like family known as the Benders? Find out on this latest, man, these are some creepy-ass people, Halloween edition of Bloody Beaver Podcast. All right, enough of that. Happy Halloween, everybody. Let's get to the story. In the winter of 1872, George Longcore and his 18-month-old daughter, Mary Ann, left Kansas and were headed to Missouri to visit family. George was 30, had served honorably in the Civil War, and by trade was a blacksmith. He was also a widower. His wife, Mary Ann, who his infant daughter was named after, had passed away in 1871, likely from complications during childbirth. He had another child, Robert Longcore, who had already passed away before reaching the age of 2, from lung fever. Man, life was rough in those days, and it was especially rough for Robert. He's only 30 years old, and he survived the hellish slaughter known as the Civil War, only to come home, fall in love, get married, start a family, and just quickly lose his wife and son. Unfortunately, things were about to go from bad to worse for Robert. He bought a wagon from his neighbor, a Dr. William Henry York, and they were traveling by the way of the Great Osage Trail, and they were never seen again, at least not alive. That following spring, Dr. York was concerned about his former neighbor and went looking for him. He questioned fellow travelers and homesteaders along the way, finally reaching Fort Scott, Kansas, and then, on March 9th, began the return journey home. But he never made it. He, too, went missing. Unlike many of the previous missing people, Dr. York had 2 powerful and influential brothers who weren't just going to let this particular missing person's case go. Colonel Ed York and Kansas State Senator Alexander M. York. Man, can you imagine how proud the York's parents must have been? You had a colonel, a senator, and a doctor as sons. And I can't help but wonder if they also had like another unknown to history son, maybe named Greg, who was unemployed, and did whatever the Wild West version of eating flaming hot Cheetos and playing video games all day was. Anyway, the doctor's brothers started investigating. Colonel York personally traveled to Labette County and started looking at not only his brother's disappearance, but the area's numerous previous disappearances. Before long, all eyes started to turn on a local family, the Benders, and for good fucking reason. The Benders were one of 5 families of spiritualists that had settled in the area in October of 1870. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, spiritualism is a religious movement based on the belief that departed souls can interact with the living. Spiritualists sought to make contact with the dead, usually through the assistance of a medium, a person believed to have the ability to contact spirits directly. Some mediums worked while in a trance-like state, and some claimed to be the catalyst for various paranormal physical phenomena, including the materialization or moving of objects, through which the spirits announced their presence. So right off the bat, fuck that. I don't fuck with that shit. Homie, don't play that. You're never gonna find me around a Ouija board. Any of this contact of the dead shit scares the ever-loving shit out of me. I feel like it's inviting some sort of evil into your life. And don't put that evil on me, Ricky Bobby. Modern spiritualism traces its beginnings to a series of apparently supernatural events at a farmhouse in Hydesville, New York in 1848. The owner and his family, as well as the previous occupants of the house, had been disturbed by unexplained sounds at night. After a severe disturbance, the owner's youngest daughter, Kate Fox, was said to have successfully challenged the supposed spirit to repeat in raps the number of times she flipped her fingers. Once communication had apparently been established, a code was agreed upon by which the raps given could answer questions. And the spirit was said to have identified himself as a man who had been murdered in the house. Fuck that. Ugh. Don't like it. I don't like it at all. The unconventional new movement naturally provoked opposition. There were not only verbal condemnations, but occasional mob violence. Church leaders associated spiritualism with witchcraft. Damn right they did, as they should. Some churches regarded the practices of spiritualists as part of the forbidden activity of necromancy, communication with the dead in order to learn the future. A decree of the Holy Office of the Roman Catholic Church in 1898 condemned spiritualistic practices, though it approved of legitimate scientific investigation of related phenomena. Both Protestant and Catholic bodies released a steady stream of anti-spiritualist literature. So yeah, this is the Bender family, but it gets much creepier. The Patriarch, John Bender Sr., was 60-ish and said to have been either an immigrant from Germany or the Netherlands, and he rarely spoke English. When he did, it was so guttural that it was almost impossible to understand what he was saying. His wife Elvira, that's a fitting name, also spoke very little English, and she was, how shall we say it, kind of a bitch. She was such a mean, unfriendly person that her neighbors nicknamed her the She-Devil. John Jr. was about 25, described as good-looking, but was constantly smiling and laughing, which led some people to believe that he was dim-witted. To round off the family, we have daughter Kate Bender, age 23. Kate, said to have been very attractive and cultivated, was a self-proclaimed healer and psychic who called herself, get ready for this, Professor Miss Kate Bender. Yeah, that's not weird at all. She would actually distribute flyers advertising her supernatural powers and her ability to heal the sick. She also conducted seances, fucking creepy, and gave lectures on spiritualism, and for advocating free love. And Kate's popularity would become a large attraction for the Benders Inn. Although the elder Benders kept to themselves, Kate and her brother would regularly attend Sunday school in the nearby town of Harmony Grove. So I was wondering if free love means what I think it means, and it does. While the phrase free love is often associated with promiscuity in the popular imagination, especially in reference to the counterculture of the 1960s and 70s, historically the free love movement has not advocated multiple sexual partners or short-term sexual relationships. Rather, it is argued that sexual relations that are freely entered into should not be regulated by law. And I actually kind of agree with creepy-ass Professor Miss Kate Bender on this one. If you're of legal age and a fully consenting adult, fucking have at it. I don't care what you do in the privacy of your own home. You want to be a furry? You fucking be a furry. Just don't invite me over. Anyway, these Benders operated an inn right off the Great Osage Trail where all these people went missing. And when I say the Great Osage Trail, it was kind of like the Old West version of a highway. It was a well-established road leading out of Missouri, and a lot of people traveled this trail. And remember, this is the 1870s. There weren't any Motel 6s or Holiday Inns to stay at. You either slept on the ground or you'd stay at the numerous inns that people would set up on their homesteads back in those days. You know, it was just a way to get a home-cooked meal and sleep indoors, hopefully with a nice fire to keep you warm, maybe a soft bed. The only sleep you'd get at the Bender's house, however, would be an eternal one. Side note, it's storming and thundering over here, and I'm really hoping some of the thunder gets picked up on this mic because that would just add some cool ambiance. Back to the story. The Bender's place was basically just a one-room cabin, with a canvas being used to split it into two parts. In the back was the living quarters, while the front was sort of set up like a dining area / general store / kitchen, where travelers could stop and have a meal and maybe some provisions for the road. Or so they thought. And it was at this creepy-ass inn that Dr. York's brother, Colonel York, ended up, and the Benders, well, they drew a lot of suspicion from him. These weird-ass Benders denied having any involvement, but he knew they were guilty of something. He just couldn't put his finger on it. He soon found some more evidence that the Benders were involved, and he returned with a group of armed men. York confronted them about a woman that claimed to have fled the Bender Inn after Elvira, or Ma Bender, threatened her with knives and a pistol. Though Elvira initially pretended not to understand English, she began yelling about how the woman had cursed her coffee, and when Colonel York repeated the accusation, Elvira kicked the men out, but it was too late. She had already revealed both her mastery of the English language as well as her true nature. That inner she-devil had came out. And trying to calm the situation, creepy daughter Kate offered to use her psychic abilities to assist the colonel in his search for his brother. She said that if he just returned Friday night with fewer men, she would show him Dr. York's grave. A public meeting was soon held in the schoolhouse in nearby Harmony Grove, and the community agreed to obtain search warrants for every property between Big Hill Creek and Drum Creek. They were tired of pussyfooting around and wanted the disappearances and killings to stop. Man, Kansas in the 1870s was so much different than Texas in the 1870s. If you listen to my last episode, then you know that had this situation been going on in Texas, there would have been no repeat visits or search warrants or anything like that. A vigilante group would have simply arrived at the Bender's Inn and hung every damn member of the family, along with probably quite a few innocent people. You know, you just gotta make sure. Turns out, though, they wouldn't need that search warrant for the Bender's place. A few days after the meeting, a passerby noticed that the animals at the Bender homestead appeared to be wandering free. Upon further investigation, the township officer found that the property had been abandoned and a foul odor was coming from underneath the cabin. This was enough to stir up a group of 100 or so locals to show up armed with shovels and pickaxes to search the Bender's property. And what they found probably caused some of the searchers nightmares for the rest of their lives. Underneath one of the beds was a trap door that had been nailed shut. Once they pried it open, they found an empty room, along with the source of the horrible smell that filled the cabin. A shitload of clotted up blood that saturated the floor. But no bodies. the men fanned out, searching the entire property. They finally came to Elvira's vegetable garden, and that's where they found poor Dr. York, buried in a shallow grave. Over the course of the next 24 hours, 10 additional bodies were found buried in the garden. All had been killed the same way, a vicious blow to the head along with having their throats cut. Many of the bodies had also been, quote, indecently mutilated, possibly suggesting genital trauma. They also found a collection of severed arms and legs in a nearby well. All told, the estimated remains of at least 20 people. They found George Longcore in the garden, head bashed in and throat slit, along with his poor 18-month-old daughter. So there's two conflicting reports on his daughter. One is that she was 18 months old, like I previously said, and that she had no visible wounds, so it seems that she was buried alive. The other states that she was about 8 years old and horribly mutilated, but that none of the wounds would have killed her, so she died slow, being buried alive with her dead father. And I'm not sure which one is the truth, but the Kansas City Times did report, quote, the little girl was probably 8 years of age and had long sunny hair and some traces of beauty on a countenance that was not yet entirely disfigured by decay. One arm was broken. The breastbone had been driven in. The right knee had been wrenched from its socket, and the leg doubled up under the body. Nothing like this sickening series of crimes has ever been recorded in the whole history of this country. These evil motherfuckers. Based on stories from people who narrowly escaped death at the Benders Inn and evidence from inside the cabin, investigators quickly pieced together how the killings went down. As word of the grisly murder spread, more and more travelers came forward to tell their own stories of narrow escape, including one gentleman by the name of William Pickering. When he refused to sit with his back to the canvas because of the disgusting stains on it, Pickering said that Kate Bender threatened him with a knife, at which point he fled the premises. In another instance, a Catholic priest said that he too fled when he saw one of the Bender men concealing a large hammer. And another person who would narrowly avoid death at the Bender cabin was gunfighter John Wesley Hardin, who I covered on my last episode. He too would refuse to sit with his back to the canvas and claimed that he didn't like how the Bender men were just acting and just had a bad feeling about the place, so he took off. Doing research on John Wesley Hardin was actually how I found out about the Bender family, and I had never heard of them before. So anyway, going forward, guests would be given the seat of honor at the dining table, which happened to back up to the canvas divider. While eating, Kate would likely charm and distract the guests, while either John or John Jr. would creep up from behind the canvas and bash their skulls in with a hammer. Then one of the women would simply walk up and cut their throats, making sure they were dead. They'd then drop the body down through the trap door, where they could dismember it at their leisure and bury it later under the cover of darkness. There were about a dozen bullet holes in the cabin ceiling, suggesting that some of the victims did attempt to fight back. And to make matters worse, the Benders weren't just killing for money. These weren't targeted murders. Some of the victims had money, while others were poor as dirt. Nah, these killings seemed to have been done for pleasure, just for the pure thrill of it. A reward was soon offered for the rest of the Benders, and search parties fanned out in all directions. They were able to find wagon tracks and eventually found the Benders' horses abandoned outside of Thayer, Kansas, just a dozen miles north of the inn. And then, poof, the trail went cold. There's a lot of speculation and rumor after this point. Some say they tracked John Sr. and Maul Bender to a train depot in Kansas City, where they called a train for St. Louis. Meanwhile, Kate and John Jr. reportedly called a train south of Texas and fled to a so-called outlaw colony on the border of Texas and New Mexico, where no lawman would dare to go. As far as history is concerned, the Bloody Benders would never be brought to justice for their evil deeds. No one would ever collect the reward money. For years after, any mother and daughter travelers were suspected as being Maul and Kate Bender. Sometimes these poor travelers would even be arrested on suspicion. In 1889, 2 women were actually extradited from Michigan on the charge. Though the pair were jailed, the case was eventually dropped for lack of evidence. And then some people claimed that the Benders never made it out of Kansas, instead falling into the hands of vigilantes. One vigilante group claimed to have shot down the men and Maul Bender and burned Kate alive as the witch they believed her to be. Another group claimed they had caught the Benders while escaping to the south and lynched them before throwing their bodies into the Verdigris River. Yet another group claimed to have killed the Benders during a gunfight and buried their bodies on the prairie. So who knows? Like I said, nobody ever came forward to claim the reward. Kind of makes you wonder, what if they really did get away and just start over fresh in a new area? I mean, do you know who your neighbor is? Do you really know who your neighbor is? Does the friendly old man next door have a secret past like the Benders? Does he have blood-stained basement? A garden in the backyard? If so, what's buried underneath it? Maybe tonight, while you're asleep, he'll silently enter your home and stand at the foot of your bed, watching you sleep. I don't know. According to an article I found on legendsofamerica.com, if the terrible story of the Bender murders was not in and of itself legend enough, another tale began to circulate regarding the property upon which the Benders had once lived. The old Bender property was haunted, began to fly the rumors of the locals. A decade after the gruesome killings, nothing was left of the cabin and outbuildings on this property. The only thing remaining, an empty hole that had once been the cellar. From these depths allegedly came the souls of those murdered on the site, wandering around the property and making moaning sounds that could be heard by passerbys. Of those most often reporting seeing glowing apparitions on the property were those who came to the site in search of the long-lost souvenir of the grisly murders. Quickly, the scavengers were frightened away by the dead souls to spread their ghostly tales. As the legend of the haunting continued, people began to say that Kate Bender herself had returned to the property, doomed to roam the very land where she had committed so many atrocities. Whether the stuff of folklore or fact, many believe that the trapped souls of these century-old ghosts continue to lurk at the site today. Okay, that about wraps up this short, but hopefully a little bit spooky episode of Bloody Beaver Podcast. I'm really excited to start working on my next episode. I'm going to cover the Federman Massacre, also known as the Battle of the 100 in Hand. In 1866, during the Red Cloud War, a detachment of 81 men were lured into ambush by 1,000 or more Lakota warriors under Chiefs Red Cloud and Crazy Horse. Captain Federman, who led the soldiers, had previously boasted, "Give me 80 men and I'll ride through the Sioux Nation." Well, he got his 80 men and he was wrong. The battle lasted less than an hour and every single soldier was killed. But there's a whole hell of a lot more to it than that. We're going to go deep. We're going to talk about Crazy Horse. We're going to talk about buglers. Yeah, buglers. And we're going to look into whether or not the widely known and accepted narrative of the battle is true or not. It's going to be fun, so please stay tuned and give it a listen. Also, I'd like to give a shout out, or a recommendation. A shout-amendation. I recently stumbled upon a history podcast called Beyond Reproach. While I cover strictly Wild West era topics, Beyond Reproach covers a whole array of boring stuff like the history of watching paint dry, for instance. No, I'm just kidding. Beyond Reproach is a comedic history podcast about scandals and scandalousness in politics and government. Each episode, hosts Stephanie and Tux explore the sordid stories of America's past, all while drinking heavily, talking too much, and generally making fools of themselves. They hope that these stories entertain you, teach you a thing or two, and maybe even draw some parallels between the mistakes of the past and the quagmire that is American politics today. And they do a good job. They're Yankees, and I don't mean like northern Louisiana Yankees. I mean for real Yankees, based in the heart of Yankee land, Brooklyn, New York City.
New York City! Get a rope.
Hey, no, none of that here. We're not lynching anybody today, damn it. I told you, we're not doing that anymore. Get the fuck out of here, Rufus. Sorry about that. So yeah, give Beyond Reproach a listen. They recently did a spooky episode themselves that I found extremely interesting. And let me just say, they do what I really look for in a podcast. Two engaging hosts that make you wish you were there to join in on the conversation. And they just seem like genuinely nice people. So check them out. As always, feel free to contact me at bloodybeaverpodcast@gmail.com and rate and review on iTunes. Be careful this Halloween. Don't stop at any creepy inns. Don't make direct eye contact with any German people. Make sure all of your doors are locked. And for God's sake, do not go down into the basement.